complex. And that leads us to the last meaty article that we want to talk about. And that is, this one's from CIO.com. And it's basically talking about one of the roots of everything we just talked about being a challenge is the fact that we sort of right there in the mix of all that talked about agents and AI and generative AI and sort of, we're doing it ourselves, just sort of mixing and matching these terms a little bit. And this is one of the issues, that there is still not a common accepted definition of what an AI agent even is. And this article points out that in addition to the legitimate lack of a consistent definition, there's also a whole bunch of folks out there that aren't even trying. They're just simply taking automation or maybe a simple algorithm and slapping the phrase agentic AI on it in the hopes that it gets them someplace. And so it's certainly, I think, as a CIO, and the whole point of this article is that it creates risk and challenges for a CIO because these hype is blurring these lines of being able to sort it all out. And so I don't know. I mean, I feel, if anything, I feel like it's getting worse. And like your experience at RSA last week sort of, solidifies that. Like, I think the problem that because this has become so hyped up that it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes. And we're right now struggling to figure out whether an agent is simply an algorithm that can take a single action, or whether it is a chatbot, or whether it is the use of a model, or whether the model is interacting with another system, whether the agent is actually making some sort of decision, whether the agent is taking multiple workflows and linking them together through some sort of memory or some sort of attention, and whether those agents, can an agent talk to another agent, and can those two agents work independently together on any sort of work? This right over here is where all the promises are being made, and over here with the chatbots is where a lot of this stuff actually is right now. It's the user interface associated with an agent, but not necessarily the backend logic and decision-making capabilities.
So, I have a very simple definition of it. I'm curious and feel free, I'd be really fascinated, feel free to shoot holes in this, but my definition is very simple. I look at this and say that if I think of this in terms of, we had generative AI and now we have this idea of agentic AI, right? What is the step between those two? Mm-hmm. Generative AI was just that. It generates a response. It is simply a conversation. It gives you information. It may be able to pull that information through a RAG system, but its job is to do one thing, and that is to answer the question that you asked it and give you information. To me, an agentic AI solution simply takes that to the next level of being able to take action. And one of the things that this article points out, and I actually disagreed with, is that the agent is all about autonomy. And I'm going to use the term very literally, right? Think, for those of you not old like me, we used to have something called travel agents. When we needed to book travel, we couldn't just do it like we do now or go online and book it. We had to call somebody who booked travel for us. And I think that idea of a travel agent is actually a pretty good model for at least how we think of agents today, because that agent didn't operate autonomously, not in the way that some people I think are imagining AI, right? They didn't somehow magically figure out that I wanted to take a trip to Tahiti and just chose the hotel for me, booked my flights, and all of a sudden send me an email saying, here it is. No, there was a conversation, right? And I'd say, hey, I want to book a trip to Tahiti. And they'd say, great. For how many people? When? What level? How much money do you want to spend? Like, all these questions would then go out, do some research, say, hey, this is what I found. Does this look good? Yeah, that's what I want. Great. Let me book the tickets for you, right? That sort of interaction is where I think how we should be thinking about agents right now. That I'm not sure if I would consider any of that quote unquote autonomous in the way that a lot of people refer to it. They're taking action, and they're taking that action autonomously insofar as I'm not pushing the button, but they're doing it based on my explicit direction, right? They're acting on my behalf. They're simplifying the process for me. They're employing a whole bunch of knowledge that I don't have, what all the resorts are, what the best time of year to go, oh, don't go to that one, they have a bed bug infestation, all that kind of stuff that maybe I don't know, right? That's how I think of an agent today, right? Of interacting. And potentially also having this layer, and this would be the autonomous piece of, oh, they noticed that a hurricane just came through and I'm already there. And the agent is saying, I'm going to rebook those flights for you because I know that you're going to be gone, right? So yes, that's a degree of autonomy within a very constrained sort of set of parameters. That's how I think that an agent makes sense today. And it's not that complicated. I mean, I'm not going to say that that's what I just explained is actually very hard to do, but I'm saying I think all these debates sometimes overcomplicate the fact of how we as humans would want to interact with someone that we might call in a human world an agent. I think we should be thinking about AI agents the exact same way.
Yeah, I think actually that chain of thought and the intermediate interruptions are an important piece of the puzzle, because if you simply ask a question and then it tries to work through the entire problem and never assumes that it might be missing important information, that's not really agentic in the way that we're being sold it as, because we think of agentic as something that is eventually over time able to take over the tier one work, the most basic work that we do. And you can't do that without interacting with the person who is making a request. Even if you are asking the most basic help desk ticket, you are typically going back and forth with the person who asked at least once to make sure that you're going in the right direction, or to clarify some information, or because they asked the question poorly, not their fault. They're not the subject matter expert, you are. So that, there's that type of back and forth, and understanding that the information that you've received is not sufficient. And I feel like anything that drives straight through to completion every single time lacks that intelligent capability.
Well, and here's what's interesting about the scenario I just painted, right? So let's say travel agents still, and I know they do sort of, but for the most part, let's just say they were ubiquitous, right? Most organizations had them. Mm-hmm. The scenario I just described, so I just gave it from the consumer end of it, the person interacting with that travel agent. But now let's flip it aside, flip it upside down. And from the organization side, well, that agent I've just deployed as my travel agent, AI travel agent, is in fact acting autonomously from the standpoint is they're not going back to their human counterpart on the back end and saying, hey, how do I do this? Or, hey, is this okay? Right? They're in that regard acting autonomously. And so this is where I think the confusion of the term can come from, because I can in fact deploy that agent, and that agent can interact with my customers or my employees and is acting autonomously from my standpoint, but not from the user standpoint. Mm-hmm. Right. And that is a really, really critical distinction about understanding how we start thinking about this technology and where we apply it. So, I think it's an ongoing challenge. And to your point, then that opens up this whole other can of worms. And that is, do I then have second tier agents? Is that front end agent interacting with back end agents to handle things? Do I have a security agent sitting there monitoring it? Hey, you can't book that trip. This looks like a fraudulent charge, right? And that becomes that whole sort of thing. But yeah, it's quite an interesting space, and I think that people are still really struggling to sort of get their head around it, and even to figure out which way is up.